Beyond Words by Matt Francis. A bell chimes above her as Katie pushes open the old wooden door that leads into Silo's Books and Curios. She had finally found this small, almost invisible, shop tucked in between a craft store to its right and a health food store to its left. It would have been easy to walk by had you not been expressly looking for it, as Katie had been. Ding ding. Katie looks up at the sound, surprised to see not a brass shopkeeper's bell, but two silver bells that look as though they have just been cut from Santa's sleigh. The crystal-clear ringing of the bells hangs in the stale air of the otherwise quiet shop long after she shuts the door and cautiously steps within. The lights are dim and the walls are covered from floor to ceiling with tall, rickety shelves. And every inch of every shelf is stuffed corner to corner with books. Old books, new books, soft and hardcover books, picture books, and old boring-looking books. Books, books, books. As far as the eye can see, more books than she has ever seen before. In Katie's house, where she lives with her mom and dad, all of her parents' books are kept in a very special glass case, and she is not, under any circumstance, to touch them. Her mom says they are precious and to be treated with respect and that she can read them when she is older. Her dad calls them expensive and not for little girls and their grubby, sticky hands. But these books aren't behind any glass, they are just sitting here, waiting to be held, to be touched, to be read. Katie looks around the shop suspiciously, curious that no one else seems to be here. After a moment, and moving very carefully, she makes her way to the bookshelf closest to her, raises her hand very slowly, and stretches her fingers towards the books. "Fancy an adventure, do you?" a voice says mysteriously from somewhere in the darkness behind her. Katie pulls her hand back and spins around, looking horrified as a tall, slender, and bearded man makes his way out of the shadows in the corner of the bookshop. He appears to be very old. I'm very sorry," Katie stammers as she takes a step backwards, away from the tall man, whom she assumes is Silo, the name on the sign above the door. At least she hopes it is. She bumps into the shelf behind her, and an old, expensive-looking book tumbles from its home and lands heavily at her feet. "I shouldn't have tried." She stops talking as she looks up at the old man and he stares back at her. And for a moment she considers running to the door. Just then the old man tilts his head back and laughs loudly and heartily. There is something special about him, but Katie isn't sure what it is. Before she has a chance to say anything else, Silo takes two long strides towards her and bends down to pick up the book. He flips it over and inspects its cover as he stands back up straight. "The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, he asks, smiling again. "Fancy a ride down the Mississippi, do you?" He holds the old book out to Katie, but she doesn't take it. In fact, she is scared to be even close to it. "I shouldn't," she says, looking up at the old man cautiously. "It looks expensive." "Shh!" Silo exclaims as he pushes the book into her hands. "Books are for reading, young lady, not for coddling. I implore you, please take a look." Before she can protest any further, he walks away towards the old cash register at the back of the shop, leaving her with the Twain classic clutched tightly to her chest. When he reaches the counter, he turns around and looks back at her. "Open it up, you may be surprised by what you see." He smiles slightly, and Katie sees a small twinkle in his eye before he bends over the counter and begins to scribble on some papers. She watches him for a second longer before returning her attention to the book still clasped in her small hands. Very carefully, she opens it at random, somewhere in the middle. What she sees next makes her gasp in surprise. In the middle of the page, where Katie expects to see words, and sentences, and paragraphs, there is instead something that looks like a cross between a picture frame and a small, rectangular television set. At first she thinks it is a picture, but when she looks more closely she sees that it is moving. She can see a large river and after a moment two young boys on a small wooden raft paddling along the shoreline. She moves her face so close to the page her nose is almost touching it as she watches the small raft bounce along in the current. The boys on the raft turn and wave, smiling widely at her. "You could join them, if you like," Silo says quietly from across the room. Katie looks up from the book and sees that the old man is looking at her again, a smile on his face. The twinkle in his eye is still there. "What do you mean?" Katie asks, glancing between Silo and the book. watching the boys continue to make their way down the Great Mississippi. "I mean, you could dive right in," he says. "Take part in their grand adventure. It has only just begun." She says nothing for a minute as she continues to stare into the book, watching the boys she holds in her hands make grand plans for their day. After a minute, she looks back up towards the counter. "I can't swim," she says shyly, as she carefully closes the book. "I'd be too scared to try." "Well, that's all right," the old man exclaims as he bounds out from behind the register. He rushes past Katie towards a bookshelf on the other side of the shop. He pauses there, one hand on his hip and the other on his chin as he looks up and down the rows of books. "Aha!" he cries and reaches high above his head and snatches another book from its home. He hurries over to her, holding the book out in front of him. "Have you ever wanted to explore the cosmos?" "The what?" Katie asks incredulously, looking up at him with a questioning expression. "The cosmos," he repeats. "Space." He stoops down and holds out the book. It is the most chewed-up, dog-eared, poorly treated book Katie has ever seen, but she is able to read the cover, faded though it is. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Aigle. She reads, looking up at Silo as she carefully pronounces the author's name. "Madeleine, yes, perfect." He flips the book open and once again Katie sees, instead of words, a small frame with something inside of it. She peers carefully inside and sees 3 young children, 2 boys and a girl, standing at the edge of a forest in the dark, appearing to be scared but also relieved as they look out at a large house just past the trees. As Katie watches, the young girl turns and gives her and the old man a small nod and a little smile before returning her attention to her friends. The 2 boys don't seem to notice them. "You could tag along if you like. Meg, Charles, and Kelvin are traveling the galaxy, trying to save their father. I'm sure they would be happy to have you." Katie watches the page for another moment as the 3 children leave the forest and head towards the large house. Then she turns and looks up at the old man again. "I can't go to space," she says, looking nervous. "I haven't brought a coat with me. I would be so cold." She wraps her arms around her shoulders, as if she could already feel the freezing, desolate vacuum of space all around her. "Not a worry, not a worry," Silo says, and the old book snaps closed in his hands, causing dust to fly up in the air between him and Katie. He places the book on top of a pile of others, sitting atop a very wobbly, spindly-looking table. He then begins to turn on the spot as he surveys the shop, hand once again on his chin, fingers weaving delicately through his beard as he does. After a moment he crouches down and pulls a book from the lowest shelf. "Now here is one that may be just a little bit warmer if that's what you're looking for," he says with a wink, as he hands the leather-bound book to her. Katie takes the book carefully from his outstretched hands and looks down at the cover. It is very old but in remarkably good condition. It is black, with large, gold-embossed letters on the front. "The Jungle Book," she reads, running her finger over the name, feeling the gold beneath her fingers. "It's beautiful. Just wait until you get inside," Silo replies, grinning at her out of the corner of his mouth. Moving very slowly and being careful to touch only the edges of the pages, Katie opens the book. At first she can't see much of anything at all, just a dense forest, tree after tree covered with a thick blanket of green leaves and vines. Slowly but surely, however, the jungle starts to thin and before long she can see a clearing ahead. There is a stream with a fallen tree lying across it. Suddenly, a young boy, wearing only a small loincloth around his waist, Katie averts her eyes for a second before remembering it's a book, hops onto the log and begins to walk across it, holding his arms out for balance. Right behind him, a large bear follows. He doesn't look like he is chasing the boy, but just following along. Taking up the rear, a large, black panther prowls nearby, looking as if it is just out for a leisurely stroll. "It certainly is beautiful," Katie remarks to Silo, who is still standing beside her. High above her shoulder, as he also peers into the book, he says nothing but points down at the page, smiling. As Katie looks back, she sees a giant python winding its way down a tree towards the 3 friends. It turns its head slowly to look at Katie and the old man before flicking its tongue at them. Katie snaps the book shut. "Snakes? I can't stand snakes," she says, pushing the book quickly back into Silo's hands. "I could never go on an adventure in a jungle." "I see," Silo replies, With no hint of disappointment on his face, he takes the book she has just thrust on him, carefully walks back to the shelf, and gently squeezes it into its home. Then he turns back to her and smiles once again. Then, my dear, the question is, what kind of adventure would you like to go on? Katie looks back at Silo for a minute, unsure of what to say. She gazes around the bookshop, books as far as her eyes can see. Adventures, mysteries, love and romance, they are all at her fingertips, but yet, I want to have my own adventure, she exclaims, thrusting her hands high above her head. My own adventure that takes me places that I never thought I could go, to see things I never thought I could see, full of surprises and magic. She spins in a circle, but then suddenly stops and stares at Silo again before adding, but no snakes. Silo looks at her carefully, so carefully in fact it seems as though he is trying to look right through her. Sir, are you okay? Katie asks, sounding concerned, afraid that she has upset the old shopkeep, but just then Silo's magical grin returns as he spins on his heel and walks back to the wooden counter where his cash register sits. He ducks out of sight, and as Katie approaches the counter she can hear him rummaging behind it. Before she can say anything, he reappears, wearing the same magical smile upon his lined face. Well, I think I've found it, he says, the twinkle in his eye shining brighter than ever. Found what? Katie asks, searching his face for an answer. She finds none, but Silo doesn't keep her waiting long. The perfect book for you, he replies, and from behind his back he reveals a small, white book. It looks neither old nor new, it's perfect. He places it close to his heart for a moment and then without another word holds it out for Katie to take. After a second's hesitation, she reaches up and slips it delicately from his fingers. She looks down at the small book and finds there is nothing on the cover, no picture or any writing adorns it. She flips it over and discovers that the back is just as blank as the front. Then, very slowly she opens the book to the middle. To her surprise, the page is completely empty. She flips from page to page and finds them all without a mark. It's completely empty, Katie says, trying not to sound disappointed. There's no adventure in here at all. Well, of course not, dear, Silo says, his face breaking into a wide smile as he gazes down at her, his long beard twitching with delight. He reaches into his breast pocket and pulls something out, but before Katie can see what it is he stretches out his long arms and holds the mysterious object in front of her. It is a pure gold fountain pen, with her name engraved on its side, the name she had never told him. You haven't written it yet. Smoked by Takata Felix. On nights like this, Bethy thought long and hard whether a baby sister was a good idea or not. Ruthie was only 3 years old and was more afraid of the dark than Bethy, if that were possible. So, because no amount of night lighting or soft music or late-night glasses of water could soothe the screaming toddler, Bethy lay wide awake, left to deal with the fallout of her own fears. It was a frigid 4 degrees in the New England suburban town of Capetton, New Hampshire. Too cold to snow according to Bethy's dad. Bethy wasn't sure if that was true or not, but she knew the wind was causing the house to creak. As if that weren't enough, the windows clicked and crackled underneath sheets of frost. Bethy took a deep breath and flung her blanket over her head. With the covers to shield her from the noise, she was left to briefly savor the waft of crisp air before she made it stale with her own breath. She loved the way her house always smelled in the winter, the pungence of pine laced with the warm undertones of fresh-baked gingerbread cookies. It made up for the extra hours of darkness. Suddenly everything went quiet. Once again, she couldn't hear her own breath. Chills began to crawl up her spine like tiny frozen fingernails. She felt her heart pounding against her 5-year-old rib cage, and she trembled as the revelation dawned on her. It's back. The frightful reality jolted through Bethy's small frame so violently that it left her needing the bathroom. I can't wet my bed again, I promised. Without hesitation, she threw the Strawberry Kid's blanket off and jumped to the floor. She could hear her breath again, and she could see the vapor from her mouth beginning to swirl its way backward towards that thing that always showed up on nights like this. Not tonight, Shadow Lady. With that, she ran as fast as her bear-size 5 kids' feet would bring her down the hall to the bathroom. Bethy, is that you? A voice from beyond the restroom door sent a new wave of chills along her spine. It was the man of the house, Bruce. Yeah, it's me. Bethy responded. Yeah, did you just say yeah to me? Bruce growled. Yes. Bethy stiffened. I'm sorry. Yes, you are sorry, but not as sorry as you're gonna be. Bruce snarled. Bruce, please not tonight, we just got Ruthie down, you're gonna wake her up? It was Deb, she was the girl's mom, and she was too tired to fight. She had a 6 a.m. shift to start in a few hours and she needed her sleep. Bethy heard her mumble something about an early birthday present. And then the door to her mom's room slammed shut. Bethy wondered what was so funny about birthdays that caused all the muffled giggles. She let out a deep exhale as she wiped. She took a couple of extra moments to watch her feet dangle before she hopped down and proceeded to wash her hands. She was tall enough now that standing on her plastic Harriet the Hippo footstool meant she could see her reflection in the mirror. The soft buzz of the mirror light had an oddly soothing effect while she stared into her own light brown eyes. They sat perfectly proportional to her face, which was aptly framed by her lush mane of curly, straw blonde locks. Another exhale sent out a puff of vapor that thinned out into wispy strands and danced around her reflection. It was cold again, and the hum of the lights had waned. Shadow Lady is back. Bethy no longer recognized the face staring at her in the mirror. She was beautiful, though, and her hair was the same. But she was older, and her eyes were also the same, but much darker. Bethy stumbled off the footstool and steadied herself with the towel rack. There was too much going on for her to notice the towel sliding to the floor. Why are you afraid? Bethy didn't realize how tense she'd wrapped her fist around the metal rack, or how tight she'd closed her eyes, or even when she stopped breathing. Why are you afraid? The woman in the mirror whispered. Who are you? Bethy whispered back. And what do you want? You will not know who I am until you know who you are. What does that mean? Bethy whimpered. And you will not know what I want until you know what you want. Leave me alone. Bethy yelled. The next thing Bethy knew, she was back in her bed nursing sore thighs and drowning out the sound of her sister's screams with her own sobs. She'd woken up her baby sister, disturbed Bruce's early birthday present, and thrown her mom's new towels to the floor for no reason. And Bruce had made sure she knew that she was the problem. Eventually, she took her bruised legs and shattered heart to sleep while the Shadow Lady's whispers danced in her head. Why are you afraid? At breakfast the next morning, energy from the prior night's events hung heavy in the air. Ruthie squirmed in her seat and refused to eat her oatmeal. Bethy spread her eggs around her plate until it was time to wait outside for the bus. Bruce sauntered into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge and looked at no one as he gulped it down. He took 2 more cans back to his bedroom as Deb cleared the table. Don't get off the porch until the bus comes, Bethy. Deb yelled through the screen door. I won't. Bethy hollered back. She sat on the steps bundled from head to toe in a pink and yellow polka-dotted snowsuit and matching boots. It was only 13 degrees, which meant she could use that time to practice breathing rings into the winter air. She'd seen the adults do it on TV and balked at the idea that she couldn't do it too. Bethy's bus came right on time, and she was glad about that. She loved school. The teachers always smiled at her and complimented her hair. They protected her from the boys when they got the notion to pull it or fire spitballs into it. The days when she got graham crackers and chocolate milk were the best. Sometimes the kids mocked her for getting free lunch, but once Ms. Libby, the art teacher, told her the kids were just jealous, she was okay with it. They can have their jealousy, I get my graham crackers and chocolate milk, so there. It was the end of the day that loomed over Bethy like the shadow that taunted her at night. It was Bruce, at home waiting to blame her for this or that. It was her mom, looking the other way or pretending not to hear Bethy crying. It was, shut up before I give you something to cry about. That sunk her stomach like a 10-ton anchor. So, there she was, on the bus again. This time headed home, completely deflated. She stared at her reflection in the window and blinked away tears. Why couldn't Bruce see what the teachers saw? What was it about her face that made him want to slap it? What was it about her eyes that made him want to flick them? Why couldn't he see? Why are you afraid of me? The Shadow Lady had found her on the bus. The reflection was staring back at her, but the whispers bounced off the inside of Bethy's skull like a ping-pong ball. Who are you? Bethy thought to herself. She had to admit that she was less afraid than she was curious at this point. Yes, This lady was scary, but she was also beautiful and never hurt her like Bruce did. "Who are you, Bethy? How do you know my name? Who are you?" "I am Elizabeth Murray Peters." "Who is Bethy?" "I am a little girl. I love animals, but big dogs scare me. I like to read, too, and Ms. Libby says I'm really good at art." Bethy continued. "I really like stories about dragons. People are afraid of dragons, but I'm not. Sometimes I wish I was a dragon. Nobody likes bothering them." "Wish again." "I wish I was a dragon." "Wish again." Shadow Lady was no longer whispering. Her voice had morphed into a deep, mellifluous growl. "I wish I was a dragon." Bethy shouted. Her belly was on fire. The skin on the back of her neck went from cold and prickly to being so hot that it curled her baby hairs. The heat rose to the top of her head and rushed down her forehead into her eyes. Her reflection was almost normal again, except for the fire in her eyes. Entranced, she watched the flames dance. "Quit being a weirdo." One of the big kids shouted from the back of the bus. The kids erupted in laughter. Even the driver struggled to stifle his smile. But Bethy didn't care, and she was no longer afraid. At home, Bethy enjoyed a ham sandwich and a glass of apple juice before doing her homework. Bruce was probably at the bar already, so the house was at peace. Ruthie was watching some show for babies that taught them the alphabet. Weird Wizard, or something like that, Bethy thought. Bethy loved these afternoons. Her mom did laundry or washed dishes or started dinner, whatever moms are supposed to do. She usually wished those quiet afternoons would remain until they were quiet nights. The kind where little girls got to play with their dolls or eat popcorn and watch a movie while mom gave baby a bath and put her to bed. Not this time, though. After Bethy finished her homework, she slid into the bathroom and locked the door. She stood on her stool and waited for Shadow Lady to appear. After 20 minutes with no contact, her mom knocked on the door. "Bethy, you okay in there?" she asked. Yes, Mom," Bethy answered. "I'm okay." "Well, come on out of there, then. Your sister needs to go potty," she replied. Bethy opened the door and looked up at her mother. Deb had the same curly blonde hair and brown eyes, but the hair was limp and her eyes were sad. Bethy felt again like she was looking in the mirror at her future. "Bruce will probably be late again tonight. What do you want for supper?" Deb asked. "Supper?" Bethy tilted her head, attempting to drag her thoughts away from Shadow Lady. She had so many more questions, and talking about supper wasn't going to get them answered. "Never mind." Deb sighed and rolled her eyes. "We'll have leftover spaghetti." "Set the table, please." "Okay, Mama." Bethy scooted past her and headed down the carpeted hallway towards the stairs. "Mama?" Deb asked. Bethy stopped at the top of the stairs and looked back. "Did I say something wrong?" Bethy asked. She frowned and waited for a response. No, not at all," Deb assured her. Bethy relaxed the shoulders she didn't even realize she'd tensed up. "It's just you haven't called me Mama in a long time," Deb said. "It's nice to hear, that's all." "Oh, okay, Mama." Bethy smiled and headed downstairs to the kitchen. They enjoyed their dinner at ease until Bruce came home. Ruthie sat in her high chair and ate her sketty with a fork like a big girl. Bethy sat next to her in a booster seat. Yes, she was 5 years old and still needed a booster seat. She had a small frame, I said, and was finishing up the last of her garlic bread. Deb had hardly eaten anything. She was too busy watching the girls eat and smiling to herself. But, as usual, Bruce burst his drunken self through the front door and instantly changed the whole atmosphere. "May I be excused, Mama?" Bethy asked. She didn't feel like eating anymore. "Sure, honey," Deb said. "Clear your plate. I'll be in to say goodnight later." Bethy stood before gulping down the rest of her fruit punch. "If you can finish your drink, you can finish your food," Bruce slurred as he stumbled into the dining room. The room went silent, not the kind of silence where you can hear the clocks ticking and the electricity humming, but dead silent. Deb put her fork beside her plate and hung her head. Ruthie sat poised to cry on cue. Bethy, though, snatched up her dishes and headed for the kitchen sink. "I said, finish your food," Bruce growled. Bethy dropped the dishes to the floor. Luckily, she'd used her Strawberry Patch Kids melamine dinnerware set so nothing broke. She didn't even pause to look down at her mess before dashing past Bruce and running up the stairs into her room. She slammed the door behind her and belly dove onto her bed, covering her head with a pillow. The silence was shattered with cries from Ruthie, pleas from Deb, and shouting from Bruce. But loudest of all was the pounding of Bethy's heart and the deep, heavy breaths that poured hot, empty air into her lungs as she waited. "Get back here, you ungrateful little twit." Bruce stomped up the stairs so hard that the plush carpet did nothing to hamper the sound. "I'm not a twit," Bethy whispered. "I'm a dragon." "Say it again." Bethy wasn't sure when Shadow Lady had turned up, but there she was behind her. Under her, in her. "I'm not a twit, I'm a dragon." She wasn't hiding under her pillow anymore. She wasn't on her bed at all. She stood, small-framed, flat-footed and shoulders squared next to her bed and waited. Bruce didn't bother with the doorknob. He kicked the door open so hard that it bounced off the jamb and slammed shut again. He opened it again, this time using the knob. "What did you say?" The rage burned in his words and dripped from his mouth along with the drool that slid down his chin. "Leave me alone," Bethy whispered. "What did you say to me?" Bruce growled again. "Tell him again," said Shadow Lady. "I said, leave me alone." Bethy never got to finish her sentence. The anger that had burned in her belly ever since Bruce had ruined their dinner with his presence burst into literal flames in her mouth and reached out to Bruce like a pair of hands. Instantly, his eyes morphed from furious slits in his flushed face to panicked saucers. He prepared to scream, but the fire shot into his mouth before he could utter a sound. It escaped out through his eyes, ears, and nose while he flailed his arms and danced a horrific jig. 10 seconds later, Bethy was back under her cover whispering about not being a twit. Bruce was in a catatonic pile on the floor in a puddle of his own urine, still drooling. Deb was screaming and running up the stairs, sure that he'd killed her little girl this time. When she got her doorway, she stood in confusion. "Bethy, what happened? What's burning?" Deb asked, as she looked around for clues. "The Shadow Lady got him, Mama," Bethy said, softly. Deb blinked quickly and swallowed hard. "Shadow Lady?" she asked as she tried to rouse Bruce. Bethy watched intently as Deb's repeated attempts to awaken Bruce from his stupor failed. "Don't worry, Mama, he's not going to bother anyone again," she said with a sweet smile. Bethy was right. 6 months later, Bruce sat in a wheelchair wearing a diaper and a bib, staring out of the living room window. Deb, as his guardian, collected his checks every month, which was enough to cover a nurse for him and pay the bills. As for Bethy, she had gotten her wish. Peaceful afternoons of ham sandwiches and homework turned into pleasant evenings filled with movies and popcorn and hearing little Ruthie squeal in delight while Mama gave her a bubble bath. Sometimes Mama would even let her watch a movie about dragons.